Most watch collectors know what a power reserve indicator is supposed to do. It tells you how much energy is left in the watch. Simple enough. But what's fascinating is how the watch actually knows that information mechanically. Because unlike a smartwatch, there's no battery sensor, there's no electronics, no computer tracking energy levels. Inside is a completely mechanical system made of springs, gears, levers, and wheels. The watch is somehow able to measure the remaining tension stored in the mainspring and display it visually on the dial. And once you understand how that works, you start to appreciate the complication in a very different way. So in this video, I want to break down exactly how power reserve indicators function mechanically and why some collectors love them while others hate them. And I'm going to use a couple watches as examples, including one of the favorites in my own collection, this Grand Seiko SLGA017.
Now my name is James, I'm a watch enthusiast, I'm a watch collector, and I'm also an advisor. And my main goal for you is that you know and love your watches. So if you like this type of content, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel, and check out my additional content down in the description below.
Before we can understand the indicator itself, we need to understand what a power reserve actually is. And at the center of every mechanical watch is a mainspring. The mainspring is essentially the energy source of the watch. It's a tightly wound strip of metal stored inside a component called the barrel. When you wind the watch, either manually through the crown or automatically through the rotor, you tighten that spring little by little. And as the spring slowly unwinds, it releases energy through the gear train, into the escapement, and eventually into the balance wheel, which regulates the timekeeping of the watch. So when we talk about power reserve, what we're really talking about is how much usable energy remains inside the mainspring. A watch with a 40-hour power reserve can theoretically run for 40 hours after being fully wound. A watch with a 5-day power reserve, like the Grand Seiko SLGA017, can run for almost 120 hours before stopping. And the power reserve indicator is essentially acting like a fuel gauge for the watch. But mechanically speaking, the way that gauge functions is incredibly clever. So how does a watch actually track remaining energy? Well, in most cases, the power reserve indicator is connected to the barrel through a series of reduction gears and differential gearing built into the movement. As the mainspring winds tighter, the barrel rotates in one direction. And as the spring unwinds and releases energy, the barrel gradually rotates back. The watchmaker can use that movement to track how much tension remains in the spring. Now, depending on the movement architecture, different brands solve this differently. Some systems directly monitor the barrel rotation. Others might use differential gearing, which compares the motion of winding against the motion of unwinding. And this is where things become genuinely impressive from an engineering standpoint, because again, the watch is not measuring electricity. It's not measuring voltage, it's mechanically interpreting stored torque. That is an incredible thing when you think about it. Now, if you've ever watched a power reserve hand actually move while winding a watch, you're literally watching a visual representation of that stored energy. And there's another important detail here that enthusiasts should understand, because a mainspring does not perfectly release constant torque. The force delivered by the spring changes as it unwinds. Typically, your strongest torque will exist near a full wind, and the weakest exists when it's nearly depleted. That's one reason why many watches become less accurate as they near the end of their power reserve. At the higher end of things, watchmakers spend enormous amounts of effort engineering around this problem. Some use twin barrels, some use just longer mainsprings in general, some use constant force escapements, and others improve efficiency just throughout the movement. And this is actually one reason the spring drive system inside Grand Seiko models is so interesting, because spring drive is extraordinarily efficient in terms of how it manages energy. Combined with dual barrels, Grand Seiko is able to achieve an impressive 5-day power reserve while maintaining excellent accuracy. So let's talk about some different types of power reserve displays. The most common style is the traditional hand indicator, and this can be on the dial side Or, like on this watch, you can also have it on the movement. Grand Seiko uses a fan-shaped display that visually tracks the remaining reserve. What I personally like about Grand Seiko's implementation is that it feels mechanically honest. It's pretty straightforward, especially on a spring drive movement, because when you combine a highly accurate glide motion, like you get with the smooth sweep of the seconds hand, along with a 5-day reserve, the indicator actually becomes useful in day-to-day wear. You become aware of the watch as an energy system in a way. And when they do the power reserve on the dial, Grand Seiko has done a very good job at integrating the complication into the architecture. Some brands, like Alanga Unzona, use linear power reserve displays instead. A great example of this is the Langa 1. German watchmaking often approaches complications with a very architectural mindset. And linear indicators tend to feel more technical and instrument-like than others. And in many Langa watches, the reserve indicator becomes part of the visual identity of the watch itself. Other brands hide the indicator on the back of the watch, and this is especially common on dress watches where dial symmetry is really important. Honestly, I understand why some collectors prefer this approach. I prefer it myself. A power reserve indicator on the dial just changes the balance a little too much for me. But some people love that technical asymmetry, while others feel like it creates a little clutter on the dial. Then you have more complicated displays, such as retrograde, where the power reserve sits along the outside edge of the watch, rotating discs that will actually turn as the reserve changes, and even digital style indicators. These are often seen in high horology, where the complication itself becomes a showcase of creativity and engineering. Now here's the real question, do collectors actually need power reserve indicators? For manual wind watches, I would say you definitely do, because you are actively managing the energy state of the watch. But even on automatic watches like this one, I think there can be value in having some sort of a power reserve, especially if you're rotating through multiple watches. The power reserve indicator does help you understand not only how efficiently the watch is winding, but also how much runtime remains and when the watch is going to stop overnight. And this becomes even more useful on very complicated watches. Imagine having to reset something like a perpetual calendar or a moon phase every single time you take the watch off. Nobody would enjoy doing that many times. So long power reserves and reserve indicators can dramatically improve the ownership experience, particularly again on mechanical manual watches. But beyond practicality, I do think there's also a psychological aspect, and that's where it connects to the point of this channel. A power reserve indicator in some way creates interaction, and it reminds you that a mechanical watch is kind of alive because of that stored energy. You wind it, you wear it, you maintain it, and you participate in that relationship between the owner and the movement, which is part of what makes mechanical watches so emotionally satisfying. Now again, not every collector likes power reserve indicators, and I understand that criticism wholeheartedly. On some watches, I think they just disrupt the dial symmetry, and minimalist collectors often prefer completely clean dials like this one. Technically, adding a reserve mechanism does introduce some additional complexity with more gears, more components, and more engineering constraints. But in some cases, you're going to have also thicker movements, more difficult servicing, and more crowded dial layouts, and a lot of brands will approach this very differently. Grand Seiko tends to embrace functionality. German watchmaking often emphasizes architectural precision. Swiss dress watch brands sometimes prioritize that visual purity instead. So none of these approaches are wrong, but they're just different interpretations of what a watch should visually communicate. Now at the end of the day, a power reserve indicator is much more than just decorative complication. It's a visualization of stored mechanical energy. Once you understand how these systems actually work mechanically, you start to see them differently. You realize that the watch is continuously tracking the state of its own mainspring through nothing but physical interaction between gears, barrels, and torque. That is an incredible achievement of mechanical engineering. And personally, I think watches like Grand Seiko demonstrate why this complication can continue to matter, because they're not flashy, they're not complicated for the sake of being complicated, but it does deepen the relationship with the movement itself. And for me, that is what satisfying watch collecting is really all about. So let me know in the comments, do you prefer having a power reserve indicator on the dial? Do you prefer it on the movement? Or do you prefer to not have one at all? And if you liked this video, take a look at one of my other recent videos where I talked about case materials and how it can impact your ownership of a particular watch. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.